Pesticides are chemicals used to kill and control the numbers of pests. Pests are unwanted organisms. So if we have an organism that we don't want living in this one place, we can apply a pesticide to remove it. The pest is the target organism, the organism that we want to kill or push down in numbers. Any other organism that is harmed by that pesticide is called a non-target organism. Now, pesticides come in two main types. Persistent pesticides remain active for long periods in the environment. So they stay in the environment and are harmful for long periods of time. Non-persistent pesticides break down quickly in the environment, so they may last only days or weeks in the environment before no longer being toxic. There are many different types of pesticide. One type is called an insecticide. Insecticides are used to control insect populations. Now, insects carry diseases from people to people. Insects carry diseases from animals to people. Insects carry diseases from animals to animals and from plants to plants. So insects are called disease vectors. They carry diseases from one place to another. And not only do they do that, insects also eat large numbers of plants. Therefore, they have an impact on agriculture by destroying the plants we're trying to grow. So insecticides are used to kill off those insects. There are many natural insecticides, but natural insecticides are more difficult to apply and are not very long lasting. Chemically produced insecticides are much more chemically stable. That is, they last a lot longer in the environment and therefore can be applied one day and keep on killing organisms for a number of days. The first type of chemically produced insecticide we'll look at is a group called the chlorinated hydrocarbons, and an example insecticide of this group would be DDT. So insecticides that are chlorinated hydrocarbons last for a very long time in the environment, maybe 25 years. And unfortunately, they don't just target one type of insect. They also target many non-target organisms. So chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides not only kill the insect you want to kill, but any other insect that they may come in contact with. So they'll kill bees, even though you would want bees to help pollinate your apple trees, to help pollinate your orange trees, to help pollinate your pear trees. They don't just kill insects, they also kill arachnids. So they'll also kill spiders. Spiders that would have been predators on the insect you were trying to kill. So they're definitely more of a biocide than a straight insecticide. Now, because they last so long in the environment, in most parts of the world, chlorinated hydrocarbon type insecticides have fell out of favour, and in fact many of them are banned. They are incredibly good at killing insects though, and so there is often pressure to use chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides in terms of public health measures. In areas where malaria is rampant and we want to knock down the mosquito population to reduce the malaria rates, insecticides that are made from chlorinated hydrocarbons like DDT are incredibly useful. The next group of insecticides are the organophosphate and carbamates. Now, these have a benefit over the last group because they're short-lived compounds, so they're non-persistent. They don't last long in the environment. Their downside is that they're also biocides. They don't just target one type of insect. They kill all insects. They kill other organisms such as arachnids or spiders, and they also are extremely toxic to vertebrates. Organophosphates and carbamates generally work on the nervous system. So they prevent the enzymes that would normally control the nervous system from functioning. So most of these are going to be nerve agents. They work where our motor nerves interact with our muscles. So once a motor nerve tells a muscle to contract, these insecticides prevent that animal from ever stopping that muscle contraction. So the muscle will continue to contract for the rest of its life. So they mess with the neurotransmitter breakdown products, In most organisms, this is a cholinesterase. So they prevent the cholinesterase from working, so once you actually start a muscle contraction, you will do that muscle contraction forever. Now breathing takes a muscle contraction, so you're trying to breathe in and out at the same time, and therefore death is going to occur. So organophosphate pesticides are very effective against insect pests, and they have the benefit of breaking down quickly in the environment. Their downside is they are extremely poisonous to mammals, including humans. So if there's any leak of them into the environment and humans are present, there's going to be a very large negative impact. And that's putting it nicely. So here's our example. Union Carbide was an American-owned company, and they had a plant in Bhopal, India, where they made insecticides. One night, the plant sprung a leak and leaked organophosphate pesticide into the town. Now, as the gas passed through the town, remember that it's a nerve agent, so it was absorbed by the people, affected their nervous system, and basically acted like a nerve agent would on a battlefield. That pesticide, acting as a biocide, killed many mammals within the town. So not only was it killing humans, it also killed farm animals, such as pigs, chickens, sheep, cows, as well as killing large numbers of the population within the city. These are the funeral pyres. They're actually cremating the bodies of all the people that died around the city. You can see the lines of bodies going out off to the horizon. So the use of these pesticides, if not strictly controlled, has a huge impact on human health. Herbicides are pesticides that are used to control plants. About 60% of the pesticides used in the US are actually herbicides. Farmers spray them on their fields to stop weeds growing between their crop and competing with their crop for soil nutrients and light. Traditionally, what would happen is farmers would hire workers to go through the field and physically use a hoe or a hand to pull out the weeds. This is extremely expensive in terms of energy and workers' wages in a more developed country. In more developed countries, it's much cheaper and more economical to just spray herbicide onto the field. Herbicides come in three basic types. They are synthetic plant growth regulators, and these are chemicals that mimic the growth regulators within the plant, so they cause the plant to grow uncontrolled. Rather than the plant slowly growing and producing leaves and then stems, all part of the plant will grow dramatically, and basically the plant will run out of energy. The growth will be faster than the plant can actually do photosynthesis and make energy. The plant will run out of energy and die. The second type is photosynthetic disruptors, and these prevent the plant from doing photosynthesis, so they prevent it from turning sunlight into sugar. And without those sugars, the plant can't survive and they die. And the last type of herbicide are enzyme inhibitors. So they stop enzymes functioning. So they prevent the plant from doing chemical reactions. So they're going to disrupt the chemical reactions within the plant, prevent it from utilizing its nutrients, and therefore the plants die. Fungal diseases are extremely important in grain production. Rust is the #1 fungal disease found of wheat. So we have fungicides to kill off fungal infections. Rodenticides are for killing mice and rats. Mice and rats eat large amounts of grain each year and destroy large numbers of crops. So in many parts of the world, governments actually have a bounty on rats, and if you kill rodents, you can take them in and earn money for it. Rodents have also carried some of the world's worst diseases. Think of the Black Death as it went across Europe. So rodenticides are extremely useful for controlling the spread of disease and crop production by rats and mice. That was some of the types of pesticide, but what would a perfect pesticide look like? The perfect pesticide would be inexpensive. It would only kill the target organism, not killing or affecting any non-target organisms. It would be non-persistent, so it would only last in the environment for a very short amount of time. And then it would break down into harmless materials. This is one of the problems with DDT. DDT is a persistent pesticide, but even as it's persistent, eventually it does break down. But when it breaks down, it generally splits into two chemicals, both of which are toxic. So we need non-persistent pesticides that last a short time. They break down into chemicals that are harmless in the environment. Now, though we do not have a perfect pesticide in existence, you must understand that if you make a pesticide that affects just one organism and has a very short half-life and breaks down into something completely harmless, then that's not going to be inexpensive. If the pesticide doesn't last long, it doesn't have a very long shelf life. So the company can't produce it in large amounts and just store it until somebody buys it. With a short half-life, they can only make small amounts. They have to ship it and the farmer has to use it fairly quickly so that it doesn't break down on the shelf and become useless. All of this leads to expense. If we're going to do research into developing a pesticide that kills just one pest, then that research costs money and that leads to a more expensive pesticide. So the more efficient a pesticide is in terms of not harming the environment, the more expensive that pesticide is going to be. One of the problems with persistent pesticides is that they don't stay where farmers applied them. Pesticides readily attach to soil particles and when the wind blows are distributed with that dust into other areas of the environment. Pesticides are also washed off in rain and move into water bodies where the pesticide will have an effect on insects not intended by the farmer. When we looked at food chains, we did bioaccumulation and biomagnification, but it's definitely worth reminding ourselves of these terms. Bioaccumulation is the fact that over its lifetime, organisms will accumulate or concentrate toxins within their tissues. So pesticides concentrate within the bodies of organisms. The older those organisms, the more of that pesticide they will contain. Biomagnification is the idea that as you move up a food chain, you find higher and higher levels of pesticides. Because food chains act like funnels, they funnel the pesticide into the top trophic levels. So top carnivores contain many more pesticides than do lower level carnivores, than do herbivores. The problem with persistent pesticides is that they both bioaccumulate and biomagnify. Because the chemicals last a long time, they can stay within your body and accumulate over your lifetime. And because they're within your body, they can pass through the food chain. They're in the bodies of the plants, in the bodies of the herbivores, in the bodies of the first carnivores, in the bodies of the top carnivores. That allows them to biomagnify. So within the upper trophic levels of food chains, we will find many persistent pesticides, even if those pesticides were banned years ago. So this food web is just showing levels of DDT or DDT products within a food web of a coastal ecosystem. Now, if you look at the producers, there's very small amounts of DDT in them, levels in the 0.08 zone. Now as we move up a level, then you can see that in the clams and in the lower level snails and in the shrimp, levels have increased, but they're still only in the tenths of parts per million. It's only when we get up towards the top consumers that we're actually seeing high levels of these breakdown products. So in the ospreys and the cormorants and the mergansers, are we actually seeing higher levels? So we're concentrating our pesticides in the upper top carnivores within the food web. Now obviously this is important just for the ecology of it. Disrupting food webs is not what we should be doing if we want to maintain the biodiversity of the planet, and a high biodiversity is directly proportional to the stability of ecosystems. The more biodiversity, the more stable the ecosystem is, and therefore the more sustainable is our society. But it also has an impact on our food production. If we look at these food chains, then we're going from producers through consumers to top consumers. And our higher consumers are actually eating the pest. So our praying mantis is eating grasshoppers that are destroying the crop the farmer's trying to grow so that he can feed his cows. Or the caterpillar is eating the crop that the forester is trying to grow so he can develop a wood product. Now, because of this biomagnification and bioaccumulation effect, it is the predators of the prey items, it is the predators of the pest that are having the largest impact of that biocide, that insecticide. So biomagnification means that pesticide use often has many unwanted and unhelpful effects. Another unwanted effect of pesticide use is called pesticide resistance. When you do spray a pest with its pesticide, for example, if we take a bunch of caterpillars on our crop and we spray them with an insecticide, not every individual will always be killed. The most susceptible individuals all die very quickly, but some individuals will have genetic mutations that mean that they're not killed immediately by that pesticide. Now those individuals go on and reproduce with other individuals that manage to survive. So resistant individuals are left alive to breed with other resistant individuals. So they pass on to their offspring genes that mean that they are slightly immune to the pesticide. Now the next generation breeds together and they pass on genes that mean they're less susceptible to the pesticide again, and so on every generation. So by using the pesticide, we actually genetically change the pest so that it becomes more resistant to that pesticide. This happens not only in insects, but will also happen to plant pests such as weeds and fungal pests. The faster their generation time, the faster resistance develops. Now that means using a pesticide, particularly at low levels, actually causes the pest to no longer be harmed by that pesticide. So if we're going to use pesticides, we have to really try and utilize them at levels where they kill virtually all of the pest present. The higher the kill rates we can produce, the slower resistance will occur. But no matter how diligent we are, resistance will occur. So notice that farmers, therefore, want to try and kill as many of the pests as possible to slow down resistance. So they're being forced to use large amounts of pesticide to cause that to happen. So now we have competing viewpoints. One that would say use lots of this, kill all the pests and prevent resistance, and one to say use this diligently, don't apply too much because number one, it's expensive, and number two, if you apply too much of it, you're going to get bioaccumulation and wipe out the predators of the pest item that you're trying to kill. So this is really a no-win situation. If you use large amounts, you kill the predators of your pest and therefore generate your own problems. And if you use too little, you allow resistance to occur. The effects of the pesticide on non-target organisms may go beyond just killing the predators of the pest. Two other things may also happen. Number one, you'd kill useful insects such as bees for pollinating your crops. And number two, you actually change the population structure that's out there and change the community structure of the ecosystem. So by wiping out one pest, you may also kill the predator of another herbivore. And this herbivore may then grow uncontrolled and become a secondary pest species. So we've wiped out one type of caterpillar, but in doing that, the pesticide has killed out a beetle species. And that beetle species was eating a second type of caterpillar. And now our second caterpillar is growing unchecked because its predators are all dead, and now it becomes a pest on your crop. So by producing second pests, pesticides and their effect on non-target organisms are definitely problematic. And we must not forget human health concerns. Now, pesticides produce human health concerns in two different ways. One is acute poisoning. And acute poisoning is where you take a large amount of pesticide into your body at one time. So the farm worker that's spraying the pesticide onto the field is in danger of getting acute poisoning. And you can easily do a Google search and see how many people are sent to the emergency room every year through acute poisoning during pesticide application. And I suggest you do that because it will definitely open your eyes. The second concern is exposure to small quantities over time, just as you drive by the field, or small quantities on your food that you consume, or small quantities on the fruits and vegetables you handle while at the store. These long-term small quantities are called chronic minute exposure. So it takes a very long time to be exposed to large amounts, and we really don't understand well the science behind chronic minute exposure to a lot of our pesticides. We don't really understand what exposure to small doses of pesticide throughout your life will actually mean in terms of changes to your health. The problems of resistance, secondary pests, the loss of predators leads to something that is often called the pesticide spiral. And the pesticide spiral basically goes that when a modern farmer has a pest problem, he'll go and use a chemical pesticide. That chemical pesticide will cause the problems we just talked about and therefore lead to the production of more pests or the old pest with resistance. So he has to use some more chemical pesticide, and that chemical pesticide causes resistance, resurgence and secondary pests, which means that he has to use more pesticide. So he's in this spiral of having to use pesticide to maintain the quality and quantity of his crop. And each time he uses that pesticide, he's in this need to use more and more of it. Now this is worrying if we don't know what the effects of those pesticides are long term on human health, on the environment, and on your wallet. Because remember, more and more pesticides cost more money. Pesticides are generally made from oil, and oil prices are going up. So why are we using pesticides if they cause problems? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. The first one is pests destroy huge amounts of food each year. Without the use of pesticides, our food crop would be dramatically lower than it is today. And for most of our history, oil has been traditionally low price. It's been very cheap. And therefore most pesticides are extremely economical. So the farmer has to balance the cost of the pesticide against the loss of crop if he doesn't use it. And for certainly most of our history, utilizing the pesticide was the economical choice to make. The other reason we may want to use pesticides is because of disease. Malaria is a disease that is devastating to human populations. Malaria is transmitted by insects. So if we use an insecticide to kill the malaria transmitting mosquito, we remove a disease from huge areas of land. Right here in Georgia, Georgia used to have a malaria problem. Malaria was brought here and was just rampant. And we used pesticides, particularly DDT, to wipe out those vectors, those insects. And once we'd got control of the insects, we managed to eradicate malaria from this area. So now the population is definitely benefiting by the loss of that disease. So if pesticides cause problems to health, pesticides also improve health by removing diseases. So we have to balance the benefit of using these pesticides against the harm that they may cause. We've seen that pesticides have downsides, and in the last lecture we saw that organic fertilizers also have downsides. So what can we do as an alternative to conventional industrial agriculture? There's been a surge in organic agriculture in recent times. organic agriculture tries to use organic fertilizers instead of chemical fertilizers. They also try to reduce the amount of non-natural pesticides that they utilize on their farms. Now remember that organic fertilizers have some advantages over chemical fertilizers because of the organic matter that they add to the soil. By putting organic matter in the soil, that actually improves the quality of the soil. It traps water within the soil, it traps nutrients into the soil to prevent it leaching out, and it improves the actual structure and drainage of that soil as well. Not only will they use organic fertilizers to try and improve the soil, but they'll also utilize multiple crops, trying to produce more of a polyculture than a monoculture idea. The third way organic farms try and protect their soil and use less chemicals is just to try and reduce the actual trips that farm equipment takes over the land. By driving farm equipment on the land less, this causes less soil compaction and leaves less bare soil open. So it causes less runoff when it does rain, and because the soil is left open for infiltration, it causes less fertilizer runoff as well. Now chemicals sometimes are used on the farm, but they try and use pesticides that have very, very short half-lives, that is, they're very non-persistent, and they try to time them when it will not impact other organisms. So a great example is using a photodegradable pesticide, one that you can put on at night. It will kill pests, insects on the leaves, but when the sun comes up, it has no impact on spiders or bees that come out during the day. Precision agriculture is utilizing techniques to look at not a field as a whole, but as a series or patchwork of much smaller areas. So precision agriculture looks at the watering amount needed for different parts of the field, the fertilizer amounts needed on different parts of the field, and pesticide amounts needed on different parts of the field. Using GPS technology and GPS receivers in the tractors, what happens is they don't supply a field with an equal coating of fertilizer or an equal coating of pesticide. The GPS equipment will move the tractor and supply fertilizer heavily in areas that need it and much lighter in areas that still have nutrients in the soil. They'll supply pesticide in areas of the field where the pest is heavy and then turn off the flow of pesticide in areas where the pest is not present. So precision agriculture is not treating one field as one massive same ecosystem, but dividing that field up into smaller and smaller zones, each zone treated with its own series of chemicals. And one of the biggest strides forward is not just utilizing chemical insecticides and pesticides to control the pests of a farm. Instead, they use something called integrated pest management. Integrated pest management, as the name implies, is using multiple methods to control pests within that system. Now you can see the methods listed here, and we're going to take a few of them and talk about them in further detail. The first two ways that integrated pest management reduces numbers of pests on a farm are to disrupt the reproduction of the pest. So the first one we'll look at is sex attractants. In many insect pests, the female releases a pheromone into the air that calls males to that female ready to mate. So if we can chemically match that pheromone, we can release it from a trap and cause males to fly into the trap. So our example here is a plum maggot found on plum trees. The female fly would normally lay an egg on the plum, and that egg would hatch into a maggot that would bore into the plum. Now the female fly releases a pheromone that acts as a sex attractant for the males. So if we take a trap that's coated with that pheromone, then the males will fly to the trap instead. We can produce way more pheromone than the actual female does. And once in there, they're either stuck to a sticky trap, this one happens to be a sticky trap, so they just fly in and get stuck to it, or we can actually put the pesticide within the trap. Rather than spraying it over the entire crop, we just put it in one place, and when the insects come into the trap, they get coated with the insecticide and therefore are killed. So sex attractants allow us to concentrate the pest in one area and kill that pest. Male sterilization is a different technique. In this case, we deliberately grow males in the lab. So we take males, this one happens to be a screwworm males. Screwworms are a type of botfly. So the insect here is what the adult looks like. The actual larval form is a really large maggot that screws down into the bodies of cattle. So it eats a hole into the body of the cattle and then lives in that cavity, and as the cells around it die, the maggot eats the flesh of the cattle. Now we've actually managed to eradicate screwworm from the US, and we eradicated it from the US using the male sterilization technique. We took males and grew them in the lab, feeding them large amounts so they become very large and very virile. And then we exposed them to a gamma radiation source that would destroy their genetic material in their gonads, means they shoot in blanks, their sperm no longer functions. And then we released these males in large amounts in areas where the pest population was high. Now, because we'd deliberately grown these males with large amounts of food, the males were very large, they fought for females, they won those battles, and they mated with those females. So our sterilized male was the male that was mating with all of the females. So because he was shooting blanks, the females did not get pregnant, they don't lay any eggs, and therefore the population crashes. And if you keep on releasing lots and lots of numbers of extremely large males, even though they're all sterilized, the population can't reproduce anymore, crashes and dies out. So sterilization takes lots and lots of effort, but is an extremely effective way of knocking down pest populations without adding any persistent pesticides to the environment, and with no chance of causing biomagnification. The third method that integrated pest management uses to control pests are natural predators. So in this example, we have the green aphid being eaten by a ladybug. Aphids are small green insects that suck sap, the sugar juices from plants. And because aphids can reproduce asexually, females producing more females even if no males are present, their populations grow rapidly and aren't affected by sterilized male techniques. Both larval and adult ladybugs ravenously eat aphids. So if we produce large numbers of ladybugs and ship them onto a farm and release them, then those ladybugs will devour all of the aphids nearby and control that aphid population. This may interrupt natural food chains because you're adding large numbers of predators into an area. However, because it is only a living organism, there is no biomagnification or bioaccumulation of any chemicals over time. Trees on the East Coast are receiving large amounts of damage from the gypsy moth. The gypsy moth is a lepidopteran, a moth very like a butterfly, whose caterpillars devastate hardwoods. So not pine trees, but hardwoods, things like sugar maples. Because of the size of the area we're talking about, with forests being involved, it's very difficult to use normal chemicals to control gypsy moths. But a natural predator is available. There is a gypsy moth wasp, where the adult wasp will actually lay its eggs within the caterpillar of the gypsy moth. So what we find is we can grow this wasp within the lab, release large amounts of this wasp, and the wasp will naturally hunt down gypsy moth caterpillars when they're encased in their pupa. The moth will inject the pupa with its egg will hatch, the larvae will eat the caterpillar that's inside that pupa. The caterpillar will be destroyed, and therefore no more gypsy moth. Coming out of the pupa will come the adult wasp, and the adult wasp will fly off to try and kill more gypsy moths. So if we can grow in the lab large numbers of these wasps and release them into the environment, we can use this natural predator to control the gypsy moth. Again, this may have some disruption of a food chain because we're adding large numbers of one organism into an area where it's not naturally present. However, the benefit is no chemical, so we're not dependent on oil to make that chemical, no long-term persistence, and no bioaccumulation or biomagnification. We talked about how developing resistance in pests is a downside of using chemical pesticides. But we can have resistance also being an upside in IPM. Through genetic engineering, we can produce crops that are immune to certain pests. So one example would be BT corn. BT corn is a genetically modified plant. BT is a toxin that comes from a bacteria. The gene for this toxin was cut out of the bacterial cell DNA and implanted into the DNA of the corn plant. So as the corn grows, it actually reads that bacterial gene and makes the bacterial toxin. Now this toxin is harmful to insects when they eat it. So in BT corn, if an insect comes along and eats the leaves of the corn or tries to burrow into the kernel of the corn, it receives a deadly dose of insecticide from the plant itself. So this is a genetically engineered crop that is resistant to insect pests. We could also develop resistance to herbicides. One example would be Roundup Ready crops. This is where the genes have been placed into the plant so that the herbicide does not affect it. You can then produce your crop and spray it with herbicide. The herbicide will have no effect on your crop, but will readily kill all of the pest plants, the weeds that are growing within your crop. Now there are some major downsides to this. One downside, particularly of Roundup Ready plants, would be the transfer of those genes to weed species. What would happen if the pollen from your Roundup Ready crop actually blew in the wind and pollinated a nearby weed that was genetically very similar to your crop plant? That weed would then become Roundup Ready, immune to the Roundup herbicide, and now you've developed a pest plant, a weed that you cannot kill with your herbicides. So movement of these genes within the ecosystem is very troubling. BT corn also has some downsides because we've put BT in there hoping to kill certain pests of the corn. But what happens to other organisms? Does that BT come out of the corn and affect other organisms? Will it affect humans or cows that eat that corn? Will it pass up food chains? If an insect only eats a small amount of the BT corn, will it pass that BT up into the food chain so it can be magnified as it passes through that food web into the top carnivores? These are questions that we don't yet know the answer to. So genetic engineering may have huge benefits for future generations, or it may cause many problems. Only time will tell. And the two last ideas for integrated pest management that we'll cover. One is crop rotations. This was classically done in fields that, say, house potatoes. If you have a potato field, then lots of the pests that will actually eat potatoes will go into the soil and remain in a state of hibernation until the potatoes will grow in the next year. So during the winter period, while the potatoes are not growing, the pests will hibernate and then will become rejuvenated as the potatoes grow again. Well, one way to prevent that pest becoming a problem is not to grow potatoes in that area for the next couple of years. Because when warm weather comes back and the pests become active again, if no potatoes are on that farm, then the pest will starve and die. So if you were to grow corn instead, then you would cleanse that pest from the area. So using crop rotations will actually be able to control the actual amounts of pest within a farm. The reason this has fallen out of favour is because once a farmer has paid for large amounts of equipment to plant, say, potatoes and harvest potatoes, the next year he wants to use that same equipment, plant potatoes and harvest potatoes. If you're a farm that does crop rotations, you have to have equipment that will not only plant potatoes, but will also handle corn, that will also handle cabbages, and that's just much more expensive. And the last one is selective use of pesticides. As with most in environmental science, there is never an all or nothing approach. When we looked at energy, the most efficient approach was not to get rid of fossil fuels completely, but was to supplement them with renewable sources. And it's the same with pesticides. We don't need to replace them completely. We need to utilize them only when needed, and then using best practices to make sure we prevent bioaccumulation and biomagnification.